Welcome back to the Athlete Lab podcast, where we help athletes, parents, and coaches dive into all the things that help them be the best they can possibly be. My guest today is Kate Kelley Schneider, licensed clinical professional counselor and sport mindset coach. Kate works with adult athletes, Olympians, high performers, and all the ones in between, including their parents and their coaches, to help them get the absolute most out of their physical and mental skills. So, Kate, thank you very much for taking the time today to talk sports mindset with us.
You bet. Thanks, Phil. Appreciate that intro. Looking forward to it.
First of all, I'd just like to hear your story to get into this type of space that is obviously so important for all athletes and all people really in general. Talk us through how you got here, like what made you interested in the field, and then how have you developed in the mindset coach that you are now.
Sure. So, as a psychotherapist, I saw a lot of athletes coming in talking about losing the love of the game, high anxiety, and really incapable of playing in the moment. So, I would hear, playing different in practice than in games. Really common response from lots of athletes and how they feel because the stress response is up. So, we know that. So, seeing them in the psychotherapy side and realizing they needed more skills, and I felt I could do that and help them in that way. And as an athlete, as a coach's daughter, having three really successful younger siblings in as athletes, my brother, the most notable, Mike Kelly, played for Wisconsin Badgers for 4 years. Watching him and his story, my two sisters who were ballers in volleyball, I felt the gap of how can I help coaches as they already are asked to do so much and they have so many hats that they need to wear. And I felt as a clinician, I could, feed them skills and also work with the athletes individually on that skill building. So really I'm giving you a long answer, but the short answer is having four kids of my own, being very involved in sports and wanting to help them enjoy their experience through my understanding of the game and my clinical background.
There's a lot there. I think starting with the fact that you're a daughter of a coach, you're going to see all the preparation that goes on that a lot of people don't see that happens at the kitchen table. You're going to see the ups and the downs after games, and then to grow up in a big family of all athletes. That's a lot of probably non-planned learning. I'm sure there's a fancier term for it, but just where you're learning like all the different sides of it. So when you go in and approach now working with a team that maybe one of your children are on, or
Sure.
we're talking before a little bit about talking to a coach that's coaching your kids. That dynamic in and of itself is a difficult one when you're involved in your son or daughter's playing on a team. So how do you go about that and kind of broaching that delicate kind of topic of mental sports performance? And not everybody is as open-minded as I think a lot of us would hope they would be.
True. It's gotten so much better as you've seen. And anytime I talk about the mental side today, it's an immediate yes. Where initially years ago, there was the resistance, my players won't do that, or I can't find time during my practice. And I did meet some of that. Yet I would come back with, is it working for you? I was really involved in, the volunteerism, whatever it was. So I had a sneaky way to be able to say, and on boards and things like that of youth programs, where I would just point out what wasn't working and saying, it looks to me like these kids are suffering because they're sped up. And maybe we could try implementing something really simple and see if they can digest it. My dad, I know I'm biased, but he really was the best of the best. And his mantra was always play hard, play smart, have fun. So being, witnessing that and seeing that that wasn't always what I saw kids experience today, I wanted to take that mantra and apply it to my parenting and help coaches. And so they were open to it. I think if they trust you and you're respectful of their space, um, they'll say, sure, we'll give it a shot. And being a clinician, helps a little bit. So I didn't run in on my son's team and say, you should do this, but I just, gave them some ideas and they were receptive to at least trying it. So I give them a lot of credit for that.
It is just the fact that they're open-minded about it. Like that's a massive step for just the overall sports community. I think that's great to hear. And of course, having that layer of expertise is important. One of your books, you had 25 mindfulness techniques. Like to me, that is something that transcends sports. That can be for people taking tests, that could be at corporate meetings, it could be, before a big game and all the things in between. So talk me through, like, if you zoom out from that, what are
Sure.
the things that you really think are the most important ones on that, and what's something that people should really hone in on if this topic is new to them?
Yeah, great question. So when I work with an athlete individually, I always try and meet them where they're at. And I think when you're learning a skill for the first time, paying attention to um, what comes easy. So I go by four pillars: breathing, visualization, feedback loop, how an athlete talks to themselves. That's certainly the most important. And then when I say mindfulness, I use it in the way of tapping into your senses in order to ground you and stay in the moment. So when somebody says, "What do you start with?" I always say breathing. We all breathe, and being able to tell them the benefits of them. Most people don't know the long list of benefits to breathing, but they're willing to say, okay, I'll take one deep breath before a skill. And if I show them evidence of whether it's a penalty kick for soccer, we know that increases the likelihood of making it, shooting a free throw at the free throw line, um, wherever it might be, breaks in between shifts for hockey, that one deep breath is regulating. And an athlete that's coming into a game at a stress of a 10, if we can knock them down to even an 8, they're likely to play freer and achieve that performance flow. So to answer your question, always breathing. Box breathing is a staple pregame, and one deep breath, implementing that. So those are my go-tos. And then from there, I like to talk about, what do you say to yourself at the perception of failure? Understanding the inner voice is very, very important, and it's the hardest skill, but the one I need to understand first. And an athlete needs to know, what do you say to yourself when you fail? And most of the time, it's "I suck." That's the thing. That's the most common thing. And my response to that always gets a giggle, is sometimes you do suck. I'm not going to talk you out of that, but that's not productive. We can learn from our mistakes, but we have to, replace the "I suck" with something different. So I would say feedback loop I go to first, understanding and knowing it, and then breathing. And then the other two I fill in as we get more advanced.
So as we talk about these different techniques, is there one exercise that you could lay out that our, coaches could kind of institute right away, or our listeners could try on their own?
Absolutely. So this is just a fun one for teams, is I call it the highlight reel, and it's under visualization. And because that's the one that can be hard and people feel weird, this one's fun to really get them introduced. So what you do is you have an athlete write down their favorite athletic moment of their career. Okay. And I don't care if you're 5 years old hitting, the playground winner, whatever it is, you write down that, athletic achievement, and everybody in the room does it. And after that, you tell them to close their eyes, relive that moment for only 30 seconds, which feels long to most people, by the way, and to play out, what do you see? What do you hear? Wait, how does your body look? Um, what were the emotions you were having? And, you set a timer, open their eyes, and the body language is so cool, because what we know is replaying successes builds confidence. And when people are struggling, we need that confidence built. So it's a great one to do after a loss. It's a great one to do when morale is down. And then to have individual athletes share it is fantastic. So then they all go around, they tell the moment, everyone starts giggling, laughing. It's sometimes it's a moment of the team, sometimes it's individual, but that's my favorite exercise by far. And also really helps when an athlete's in a slump. So individually, if baseball, great, pull up the highlight reel, have them remember that they can do that thing. So yeah, highlight reel is the way to go.
The concept of recognizing, obviously, breathing is such an important thing. I think that's something all of us as coaches can implement tomorrow. As we all want results yesterday, that's something that we can definitely implement right off the bat. The perception of failure, and that also brings back something that you said earlier, which was about, like, people who've lost the love of the game, which I think those things can kind of go hand in hand. So can you kind of get a little bit deeper into that? And you gave that example, but those things, it's like individual, maybe one-off event in a game where there was a little bit of failure, but then there could be team failure. There's the team isn't winning. Maybe that's more of a parent discussion. How do you train athletes to go through that and use them as what they should be, which is learning lessons more than a way of losing love for the game. So just talk a little bit about that
Sure.
whole perception of failure on the team level and then the parent level for discussion.
Yeah, it's a great question. So that metric of winning or I want to have fun is really important to break down. Often when you ask a team, what does fun look like? That's an important thing to understand as a coach. Different teams have different levels of skill, capability, personality. And so I like to know, hey, who am I working with? And what is their ceiling likely against their competitors? And let's define fun. And maybe for one team, it's different than another team. So first of all, we want achievable metrics and to shift and pivot when we need to. We usually don't have fun when we have metrics that are not defined, when we feel confused, and we aren't communicating effectively. So I start there with every team and recognize that if we can build the skill of the mental side of the game, the confidence is going to go up, even if we're not winning. Everyone wants to win. I want to win. I'm highly competitive, but we can't always win and we can't always control that outcome, but we can control the way we mentally respond. And I've seen time and time again athletes that are not necessarily winning as a team, but their confidence is still going up because they're back at it. And that's more fun. It's contagious. I can tell you that. So, and from a parent perspective, again, I really try and educate parents on what support looks like and encouraging them to ask their athlete, what does support look like to you? And respecting that. And also recognizing that we're in a culture of saving our kids from discomfort. And that's not building anything. I mean, all that does is lower our tolerance for being uncomfortable. And mental toughness is about riding discomfort and being uncomfortable. And so once I say that, that usually gets them pondering their metric around win loss. And to your point, every parent I know wants their kid to have a life full of more contentment. And, it can get mixed up when we're focused on winning only.
It's great. I read a study recently about fun mapping and youth sports, and they had the rank. I'm sure you've read that. And I think winning was like 40th or something for these kids. It was a really well done study, and it's
Yeah.
amazing what the answers when you allow the parents to get out of the way of those like that's it. All your points there were really enlightening. I think a lot of parents and our listeners will really take a lot from that. When you work with some high level athletes competing in the Olympics. And when we are talking before a little bit, and like some of them wouldn't want to be shared, which is totally fine. And I also think it's great because you mentioned you're highly competitive. Working with somebody for the mindset is a way of gaining a competitive advantage. So these athletes that are doing it, and they don't want to share their names. I think it's great because I know that there's that level of compete to it.
Yeah.
Is there something that you can take that only the people who have the opportunity to compete at the highest levels, really the pressures they might have, but also that we can all learn from that are competing at all different levels that, maybe something that individual sport athletes have to go through that might be unique to team sport athletes that we often talk about.
Yeah. So my highest level athletes, they talk very similarly to my 16-year-olds as far as where they can get, caught. And that's always how they talk to themselves. But I would say the difference between an Olympian and a 16-year-old is it's absolutely all encompassing for the highest level athlete to sometimes a detriment. It's all they think about 90% of the time. So I'll often have them draw a circle and say, tell me where your energy goes. What are you thinking about throughout the day? And almost the whole thing is colored the same. And there's a recognition that that's dangerous. Even at that high level, we need to make sure we're focusing on other things, relationships and, um, you know, family and, work or whatever, other parts of our lives, hobbies. And that's something I really didn't realize till I started working with people that they're doing it for a living, getting paid, that they don't take a break from it. And so really encouraging them to build the skill of being in the moment allows for a break in it, right? Because you can't constantly be practicing that skill, whether it's boxing or running. And so uh, taking these mindset skills to make you be present while you're walking your dog offered some, relief for my athletes. And that part was really gratifying to see. Like, let's make you a human again. So that's probably the biggest difference, and something I think younger athletes should also think about is how can we be mindful outside of the game itself? And it absolutely bleeds into each other. If I'm, present when I'm sitting there, talking to my kid and practice that, or an athlete, let's reverse it. If an athlete's present with their parent, then they know how to do that on the court, and then they're locked in when they're talking to a coach, because everyone sees that athlete that is glazed over and they're not reachable because they're so, out of the moment. And those coaches, and they're kind of like, all right, forget it. We'll deal with it later. So yeah. So that's the one thing I would say. Make sure you're focusing on other aspects of your life and applying mindfulness techniques to that.
That's like so many things when you talk about elite performers, that there's so many life lessons there, because if you are walking your dog, be mindful, be present there, or talking, whichever. And if you're doing that, it'll allow you to have more energy at the next. I can already just feel it thinking about that, and I feel like my dog's nodding its head right now, saying, be more mindful. Uh, but those are. That's a really, really good example, and there's a lot of layers, and that's often how those people get to the highest, point, because they are hyper focused. But
Yes. Yeah.
that leads me to the next things. I know one of the things, or a few of the things you specialize on, is the anxiety and trauma and the life transitions of athletes, which sadly, I think that like this could be something that is at least brought more to the forefront that a lot of young athletes are going through. And then the identity piece, you mentioned that the highest performers, that's all they focus on. Well, when it is time to move on to something different in life, now they have this, well, who am I type of thing. So talk a little bit through that. And first of all, that's got to be really difficult, but also rewarding, hopefully, when the athletes kind of come through that. Talk a little bit about like how you go about that, and one of the things you've learned in that kind of that realm.
Yeah, I've separated the two parts of my business. So, the trauma and high anxiety, or OCD, is the psychotherapy end, and the sports mindset, I focus strictly on skills. And the reason for that is because I like to follow my athletes and have a more casual connection where they can text me right before a game and say, hey, Kate, I'm freaking out, or crashing out is, I think, the term that I hear more and more. But I can speak to just trauma and anxiety in general, and how athletes, it shows up in the sport, and it's often in a freeze response. It's often where somatically they are having panic attacks, they're dysregulated, uh, to a level that is so uncomfortable, where that's why they quit. I'm seeing, athletes, opt out earlier and earlier because of the somatic response in their body. And so I'll often say, let's try, box breathing, and these little things to just see if regulating and is going to help, any of it for you, and just a stress response. And then if they need extra work, I certainly encourage regular, weekly therapy, in order to process the more difficult things, because we're not robots, as I mentioned earlier. It's going to show up. And, I feel for athletes that have to compartmentalize. And in some ways, that makes them good athletes. If you can put that box over here of, something that's not going well, and then show up on the court and be fully present. And that's what I do on the skills side, is like, let's put it, I actually have them visualize all the things that we can't work on right this minute, but what can we do on the court? What's in our control? And empower them that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Oh, it does, absolutely. And it kind of leads to, you talk about connecting athletes to their growth edge, which is something that I never heard that concept. Like, talk me through that, and like how like, what does that phrase mean? And it's something like, anytime you say like gain an edge, as a former athlete, I'm like, okay, I'm listening. That's an interesting concept.
yeah, I think it's, why people really enjoy, the growth edge is because we all want an advantage. And when I start to talk about how do we beat an opponent mentally, I see them perk up. They're like, ooh, how do I do that? And then to let them know that if you start to get good at it, you'll know who's not good at it. You'll recognize that you have an advantage just from the head. And so you watch your opponent's head drop. What does that mean? You watch that team stop communicating on the ice, on the court, wherever. And lean in, go after it. That's where my competitive side comes up, is encouraging that you can win. And how do you mentally defeat a team? You have fun, you communicate, you put the pedal down when you see them, having their own laps. And it's gratifying actually, because what ends up happening for a lot of athletes is they get very fixed. I am this, I am that. And the only place to go is down if that's the way you talk, right? I am a good shooter. And this might be controversial for some people because I know words of affirmation are good, but if we over identify with the fixed stuff, then we have nowhere to go with it but down. So everything to me is like, how are we growing? How are we getting better? It keeps us curious, inspired, yeah, and wanting to, play more when we feel like we have room to grow. And the mental side of the game, there's always room to grow.
That concept of knowing, all right, I'm on top of this mindset, and then seeing when the other team isn't.
Yeah.
I think that sort of anecdotally hear coaches like, oh, we've got them now. Look at, they're arguing or
Yes.
they're acting out or something. That's great. But if the player knows it, if they can see it, if they can sense it, that's going to create like a real put the pedal down mentality, which is great.
I worked with the flag football team this summer and they were highly enjoyable. And I was new to watching flag football to this level. And I focused on beating a team mentally. And these girls were so into it. So I showed up to the first game. They were playing their rival. And one of them ran off the field. And she was like, we've got her, because she saw that their best player dropped her head. And it was a collective energy. And I mean, they just pounded this team. It was beautiful. And they bought in and it was really fun. So that was cool to see.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We saw her. Uh, a little bit more to that point of things that like are real reality for athletes is injuries. So you see an athlete, they get hurt, they want to do more and more and more, but sometimes depending on the injury, all they can really do is sit and wait and listen to their doctors. How do you talk them through those type of things? And is there any little nuggets that you can share that maybe parents or coaches listening or athletes perhaps could take away as, if they were to go through one of those injury times this year?
Absolutely. So my third books, my first I did for coaches, second for athletes, and then the third was for injured athletes. And I co-wrote that with my youngest son, who suffered a devastating meniscus repair his junior year. And I thought, how do we take this awful experience you're having and work? What kind of work can we do outside of just sitting in it? And as I tell every parent, every coach, every athlete, let them first feel. And we often rush to problem solving, and that never works. So let them feel first, and then let's fight. And so that looks like sitting in the suck of it for a minute and grieve it, and then immediately apply the same intentionality to your mindfulness as you would if you're playing to your recovery. And it'll translate the same way walking a dog. So if you start to visualize that knee moving a certain way, that ankle, that shoulder, 15 seconds a day, and you start to breathe, before you try that extra squat, or walk or run for the first time. And or you just focus on what you listen to and what you hear to distract yourself from the pain, to push yourself. Those little things will build confidence and usually gives, again, that growth edge of something besides just sitting and waiting for your body to get better. And I watched it with my son. It was, it was fun to see. And he recovered and came back and had a great senior year. So that was fun. It's not everybody's story, but living in the moment, there's nothing like it for injury to teach you that. I can tell you that.
It might kind of answer part of my next question. Your podcast is called the Next Play Podcast. So why the name on that? It kind of might lead into what we were just, or lead from what we were just talking about. So give me the backstory on that and some of the things you learned
Yeah.
in that realm.
Well, of course, it was some, younger, smarter marketing woman that now works for me that suggested the podcast is, and you're doing it too, right? We're both navigating this.
Exact same
Yeah,
scenario here.
yeah,
Yes.
right. I'm like, okay, you're smarter. I'll do it. Um, and she said, I think there's really a platform for talking about the mental side of the game. And, I'm nobody and, important or renowned, but I think giving athletes a platform, everyone has said yes. I mean, not everyone. We don't have Steph Curry on yet, but lots of people have said yes because they're so used to coming on podcasts to talk about their success from a physical standpoint. So I thought, let's just make it very simple. We want to know your mental skills, your mental struggles, and anything that you're willing to be vulnerable about um, for younger athletes. And a lot of people are like, sure, I'll do that. So it's been really gratifying. I do it with my third child, my son Owen, um, and he's a natural. So it's been fun. So next play is about, um, not sitting in the moment and of a failure and controlling what you can do next. And so I have used that mantra as a replacement for 90% of my athletes, and 89% of them enjoy it. So that's why we felt like that name really fit is let me not sit in how I failed or in the past and let me pull myself to the present. And the present is the next play. So that's where the name comes from. It's been nice to do it with my son and been really fun to have all these professional athletes on.
I bet that's really cool. Fun, like to facilitate that type of those conversations with all kinds of people, with also your son, because there's so much unintentional learning that would go on there too, which is cool. Sports organizations. So, how can they institute mental skills training? Like, what's someone that you've seen as an overall organization? We've talked about athletes and parents and the coach of a team, perhaps, but what are
Mhm.
these big organizations or even small ones, city ones? How can they implement it to really affect all their athletes and parents?
I love that question. I'm seeing more of it. So I'm having, associations of a particular, state reach out and have me come in for a sport, right? Illinois Basketball Association, having someone like myself, anybody that understands the mental side of the game, come in and educate coaches, empower them to try to implement it every practice. 2 to 5 minutes. And so and a lot of them are, I will tell you, I come across people that'll say, "Oh yeah, we have this sports psychologist or this mental performance coach." But the organizations that I think are getting it right are not having a one-time thing. They're implementing it as this is a new way that we are going to approach athletics. And so I encourage that for associations, for clubs, for AAU programs to just adopt this mentality of we're absolutely going to pay attention to it. We're not going to have a one-time talk. We're going to every day make it a focus. So we do calendars for teams. That seems to be really effective. Is give me your schedule and let me write out how you could potentially implement it. Because I get that it's new. It's a new concept. So there's lots of trainings out there. We have curriculum that we do, but there's so many resources. It's really saturated. And I think it's just finding the right fit for your particular organization and making sure that it's consistently applied. Because historically, it's just a one off and the kids forget about it within 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be like having one team practice and thinking, "Oh, they got
Yes.
it."
Exactly.
It's exactly. And don't worry about it. I exercised once this year. I'm good. Yeah.
So true.
So,
Yeah. It's
no,
awesome.
how can our listeners get in touch or like kind of read more about, what your trainings, all the things that you
Sure.
offer?
Yeah, we have a great staff. I'm enjoying my staff. There's 6 of us. You can find us at puresportsmindset.com. And that's where there's a list of all the coaches, much younger and cooler than me, but I got a little bit of experience on them, so I'll still use that. So yeah, Pure Sports Mindset, and then, at Pure Sports Mindset for our, Instagram and all the social media that I have nothing to do with. Yeah.
And is your podcast also part of that
Oh
then
yes,
too?
sorry. Yeah, and then next play it's streamed everywhere. Thanks for that. On Spotify, Apple, all the streaming networks. Yeah, next play.
That's great. And it's one of those things where I was susceptible to the Beatles in the car every time, but I love to hear when families are listening to, mental sports performance podcasts or athlete development podcasts, just kind of, in the car where the parents can be listening and the kids can be,
Yes.
hearing it as well. And, even those little bits, depending on the ages, can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, that's true. There's no, someone asked me at the last conference I spoke at, what age do you start at? And I thought, well, it's never too young to start building that skill. So that's a good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, that building skill and normalizing it's really really important. It's great work that you're doing. I really appreciate the time, and it sounds like your approach is excellent. So the athletes you're working with are very fortunate. And again, Thanks for sharing all your expertise with our listeners.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the work you're doing as well. I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Kate.